this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements. Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
Welcome to One Thing Trump Did, available exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and each week on this show, we pick just one thing coming out of the Trump White House to focus on it in a nonpartisan way. And today, our one thing is Florida and its political machine, which you could say is now at least partly in control of the entire country, which is how we came up with the title of this episode, Are We All Floridians Now? So what do I mean by that? Well, look at the Trump administration. Trump himself is now officially a Florida resident and has conducted a lot of business at his private club, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is from Florida. So is the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, and more than a dozen other high-ranking officials in the administration. Florida is also the fastest growing state in America, and it is now the third most populous with more than 23 million people. That is 10 times the state's population back in 1950. And I bring that up because one of our guests says the political machine that existed in 1950s Florida can be seen in our national politics right now. Joining me now is Robert Fieseler, who is the author of American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives. And Matthew Peddie is with us as well, host of the weekly public affairs show Florida Matters at WUSF in Tampa, and a longtime political journalist in the state of Florida. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Hello, happy to be here.
All right, so before we go back in time and to some very fascinating history that you detail in your book, Robert, Matthew, I want to ask you, as you look at the Trump administration as a longtime Florida-based political journalist, what do you see that has its roots in Florida politics?
I mean, pick one. It's interesting that the title of the series is, One Thing Trump Did, because it's really hard to say, Florida is just one thing. It's many things, and many of those things are now have some kind of influence on national politics, if not national culture. But, I mean, immigration would be one to look at. You saw a lot of what Governor Ron DeSantis, when he was running for governor, and even before that, he was rolling out policies that were we now see it being enacted on a national stage, not by him, of course, but by President Trump. But there's some real similarities there. Another thing to mention, too, would be education. And I know Robert has been sort of reporting on that as well. But there's some really consistent threads running through education from K through 12 up into higher education that we have seen roll out across the state of Florida in recent years, and now you are seeing echoes of that at the national level as well.
Like what? What in the education world?
Well, if you look at this notion of parental rights in education, a lot of this actually kind of goes back to the early days of the pandemic. You remember you had the Moms for Liberty movement, this idea of really pushing back against COVID-era restrictions. A lot of it comes back to what was happening in public schools in Florida. So masking restrictions, keeping kids out of the classroom and not wanting to bring kids back into the classroom and things like that. And you had essentially a revolt of a lot of parents sort of standing up and saying, look, we don't think this is right. We want to have our kids back in school. We don't believe in these mask regulations or other things like, for example, vaccine mandates. So that sort of does go back to, obviously a pretty big public health issue around how to respond to and deal with COVID-19. But that sort of spiraled out into education. Moms for Liberty took on a life of its own as a potent political force, and that sort of spread out as well. And you see some of those things kind of getting picked up in other states as well.
I was actually in Florida for many months, lived there at the beginning of the pandemic, and the people that I was neighbors with were very happy that their kids were able to be in school in Florida, and were early on the train of saying Ron DeSantis is going to be the president of the United States because of how he handled COVID. The Florida parents, I think, were quite happy with how different that was than the rest of the United States. Of course, hindsight is 2020. But let's talk about what was happening in the 1950s, Robert. The political power center of Florida at that time, you write, was in the northern part of the state, which is kind of like the deep south of the United States. And a man named Charles Johns was a key player. Who was he and what did he want?
Sure. Charlie Johns was a strident segregationist Dixiecrat state senator who was basically the most powerful politician in the state of Florida in the 1950s, 1960s, 1940s era. He was the head of a contingent of Dixiecrat, old school Florida politicians called the Pork Choppers, who had all taken a blood oath to not redistrict the state, so that basically all of the small population in the north of Florida could run the entire legislature and usually elect the governor, and also so that they wouldn't integrate racially in any public services, public schools, etc. Charlie Johns, in addition to being the head pork chopper, was the chairman of the Florida Legislative Investigation Committee, which was Florida's McCarthy-era Inquisition Committee, better known as the Johns Committee. And they went after black integrationist teachers and as well as closeted queer teachers in the school system as well as the public universities. And basically they had all the power in the world during the Red Scare to use the hot button word communist to call anyone they didn't like communists, subversives, and enemies of the people. Charlie Johns was a man that sort of pioneered a certain style of Tallahassee politics and planted the toxic seeds in our culture such that they cyclically, about once a decade in Florida, in anti-queer and anti-black movements and sentiments, sort of white power movements and nativist movements that we see tend to be an incubator for our culture war. In other words, a lot of DeSantis's notions in terms of fear of academic freedom, fear of the outsider, the use of state power to suffocate the individual, that was all stuff that was pioneered by a guy named Charlie Johns, a senator who got away with it in the 1950s.
Matthew, is Charlie Johns somebody that you have heard about, read about over the years in Florida?
It's a name I'm familiar with. I admit I obviously don't have the deep kind of research that Robert's done, but one of my colleagues, Kerry Sheridan, spoke to Robert and we had that conversation on WUSF. So yeah, fascinating conversation, really interesting book. And I think, just listening to Robert talking now about those kind of parallels, I mean, it's not just this particular era in history that he's talking about. You do see some other parallels. So even the notion of tossing around the word communism, which, Jeremy, as you know, having spent some time in Florida, I mean, that is a really kind of charged word, especially in certain parts of Florida where you have folks, for example, have fled the communist regime in Cuba or Venezuela. And so labeling somebody a communist, even today, carries a lot of power.
But Charlie Johns was not able to really find any communists in Florida. That's one of the reasons why he started going after black people and gay people.
Well, I mean, Charlie Johns was applying the term communist as unscientifically as he could. and he was determined to use it within the construct of hysteria politics to rile up his white segregationist base so that he could attack anyone he wanted to preserve the apartheid system that helped him, his friends, and the small number of North Florida voters that elected him. So basically their argument was, and it may sound ridiculous now, but that the Soviets basically wanted peace between the races so that the proletariat was strong enough to rise up against the upper classes. And that's why they needed to go after the NAACP and stop racial integration in the state. Post-Brown v. Board of Education decision, which was a federal decision in 1954 that should have applied to Florida, but the Charlie Johns and the Johns Committee decided they didn't. They also decided that the communists wanted the breakdown of the American family. So they were going to use basically homosexuality and the possibility, which we've all known as verifiably false, of homosexual recruitment to basically infect American males such that the American family collapsed from within. So the Cold War was a real thing fought in the shadows between American spies and Soviet spies. But any sort of public inquest in terms of open hearings where John's committee individuals were subpoenaing and badgering and attempting to publicly embarrass NAACP leaders, or even private interrogations of closeted queer people that they would basically entrap in cruising zones in university towns throughout Florida. Any of that was just basically provocation for them to target whoever they wanted. They were an investigation committee, always looking for something new to investigate, and they knew communism was just the term everyone was going to go along with.
Speaking of journalists, it was actually quite difficult for you to get from the state of Florida the records that you would need to write this book and to talk about this history. You found another way around it. But tell us just a little bit about the difficulty of finding out the truth from the state of Florida.
Right. So the state of Florida has mutilated this history utterly. When the Johns Committee closed down in 1965, sealed the records as part of his retreat from the legislature when the pork choppers lost control and basically they were turning the lights out in their offices. He used arcane rules from the end of Reconstruction to supposedly keep them out of the public review in perpetuity. Then he died, and right after he died, the state of Florida passed a state constitutional amendment that would allow legislative papers up for public review. And the legislature then freaked out. They panicked. They thought that if any of these basically tens of thousands of documents ever came to public light, they wouldn't just damage the reputations of historically corrupt office holders. They would damage the public trust and faith in offices themselves. So basically, they decided they were going to eliminate the names of all of the victims, anyone that Charlie Johns and his Johns Committee hurt historically. And so when they released the documents, they were basically historically useless. I went to Tallahassee basically at the first day in the COVID lockdown that the archive was open and the papers became available. I was probably the only gay guy ever excited to go to the city of Tallahassee. And I get there and the documents are utterly mutilated. I mean, to the point where it would have taken me 15 years to reconstruct and repiece together based off of the incredible censorship that they performed. So I did some digging and I found that in Tallahassee was the first Johns Committee scholar who was now working as a paralegal, a woman named Bonnie Stark, who'd been involved actually and testified in favor of open records during the documents release in the 1990s. It turns out she'd won some admirers in the state Senate staff, and they had informally, but in a very practical way, really, given her the secret second set of the records that were imperfectly redacted. They didn't put the same effort into it. So when I reached out to Bonnie Stark, she told me, I've got these 30 boxes, I've been lugging them around for years, and I want to give them to you. That's what you criminologists would call an orgy of evidence, and what historians would call a major document find.
So, Matthew, as you listen to that, and as I listen to that, I just wonder about what it is like to be a journalist in the state of Florida right now, and how those tactics might be seen on the national level, where it is getting more difficult to get people to say things on the record and just get the information that you need.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of mind-blowing just to listen to the sort of historical digging and the detective work that Robert's gone through to write his book. So kudos for that. I mean, the thing is, it is getting difficult to kind of find information and public records releases can be challenging, but there are ways to get information out. There are people who would want to talk about what's happened, whether it's something that happened more than 50 years ago or something that's happened in the last couple of months. So there are still ways around it. There's still journalists who are out there doing things and trying to find the truth and put that out there so people can listen to it or read it or watch it and make up their own minds. So, I mean, Florida, as you know, Jeremy, is a really fascinating place to be a journalist. And now, as we find this kind of confluence of political power sort of consolidating in Florida, a lot of what we are seeing on the national stage is stuff that we've sort of lived through in the last few years here in Florida. So people may be wondering what's happening with regards to, say, immigration laws. A lot of those things have been sort of field tested, as it were, in Florida. So we kind of have some inkling of how things may proceed from here.
Well, and it does seem like in Florida, the governor is a very powerful person compared to maybe governors in other states.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, one good example of that, so right now they have something called Florida DOGE, right? It's essentially, DOGE, of course, stands for the Department of Government Efficiency. It's the state's version of the task force that was headed by Elon Musk at the federal level to try and root out what they're calling fraud, waste, and abuse. And what Florida DOGE is doing, they've just started announcing audits of local cities, municipalities, and counties in the last week. They're looking at what they say is wasteful spending. And so on the one hand, you have this notion of Florida being, the quote-unquote free state of Florida, but it is a very top-heavy state in terms of consolidation of power in Tallahassee. So you have, theoretically, mayors of cities and mayors of counties who are able to, wield the power that's sort of vested in them by the voters of their county or city to spend taxpayer money in the ways they see fit. And on the other hand, you have the state of Florida through this task force coming and looking and saying, no, look, this is not the way you should be spending your money. We've actually heard from voters they want you to spend money differently, and they're kind of imposing their will on it. And that's just one example of how you have this kind of top-down hierarchy in Florida, and it's become a lot more so in the last few years.
And Robert, you write that we are living in a second Red Scare now, and that these tactics of the past are back in Ron DeSantis' Florida.
It's basically a neo-Red Scare, the first real Red Scare hysteria of the 21st century. What it's about is arch conservatives of any party with totalitarian instincts that use scapegoat groups and hyping up fear to enforce a new hegemony. And it's usually political and cultural. They want to own society in addition to owning the political sphere. So DeSantis's notions of the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, the so-called Stop Woke Act, the idea that we can't teach AP African American history because it's going to make young kids hate America. We can't give them the real history. We've got to give them a sort of American pageant that's going to get them patriotic. Those were all notions that were perfected by Charlie Johns. Basically, Charlie Johns pioneered the notion of the teaching of this sort of propaganda class to all Floridians called Americanism versus communism. And ironically, some of the educators that were tapped to put together that curriculum were individuals who had been initially targeted.
This podcast is supported by the original organic bedding and bath brand, Koyuchi.
Koyuchi has spent 35 years pioneering quality organic textiles, long before the word organic became, trendy. But words matter to Koyuchi. Words like craftsmanship, longevity, and wellness. So what does the word wellness mean to Koyuchi? It means that all of our products are absolutely free from harsh chemicals and dangerous toxins that can seep into your skin. It means effortless style that looks as good as it feels with naturally breathable, pre-washed organic cotton. And what does all of that mean to you? Well, it means that you can sleep well in Koyuchi's crisp, cool, luxuriously soft sheets that are ethically made and made with you in mind. Live well, sleep well with Koyuchi. And now during our Memorial Day sale event, you can enjoy 20% off organic cotton sheets, towels, and everything else at Koyuchi.com. That's Koyuchi.com for 20% off from now until May 25th. Koyuchi.com.
By the Johns Committee and under homosexual suspicion. So they were basically under Charlie Johns' thumbs. Then you see every decade, basically, a sort of new movement bubble up with Johnsian ideas and using Tallahassee political style. In the late 1970s, the Anita Bryant Save Our Children movement, which was an anti-homosexual movement that meant to basically cut down against ordinances that were designed in Miami-Dade County to protect homosexuals. In the 80s, you had this thing called the Bush-Trask Amendment, which is basically taking public money away from institutions and colleges that had gay groups. And then in the 90s, you had the rise of Jeb Bush and the revival of this very proud revival of the Anita Bryant era anti-gay adoption initiative, which leads us all the way into DeSantisism and their obsession with trans folk, immigrant folk. There's some real gusto behind the alligator Alcatraz, but none of DeSantis's ideas, none of Jeb Bush's ideas, and believe it or not, none of Anita Bryant's ideas were original. They were perfected by the first guy that got away with it. The greatest trick he ever pulled was trying to tell people he had no legacy, because Charlie Johns basically died without the gears of justice affecting him. He showcased how you could use the rules of the most old school form of Tallahassee politics: spoils, personal enrichment, electoral gerrymandering, doubling down, finding constitutional loopholes, revenge, no grudge left unturned, that those principles could be used to build a political power structure for yourself, and in the state of Florida, effectively crown yourself king.
Well, a lot there. Stand by because there's more to discuss as we look at what's happening in America now and how it's connected to what's happened in the past. One Thing Trump Did with WUSF's Matthew Peddie and author Robert Fieseler. We'll be right back.
You'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan, tonight 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to One Thing Trump Did, exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This episode, we're talking about Florida's political past and present and whether or not, in a way, we're all Floridians now. I'm joined by author Robert Fieseler and WUSF's Matthew Peddie. Matthew, you heard all of that there a moment ago from Robert. Do you see the remnants of the Johns Committee in Florida politics today when you think about the Stop Woke Act, when you think about the Don't Say Gay bill and other things, Alligator Alcatraz?
It's interesting to think about this. I mean, a couple years ago, when we were looking at some of the policies that were being championed by Governor Ron DeSantis, the thinking was that here is somebody who obviously has higher political ambitions, and I don't think that's changed. But of course, we saw that his aspirations to be the Republican nominee for president didn't go too far. But he was, for a time, running for president, and we saw a lot him really sort of doubling down on some of these fairly. It's hard to find one word to describe them, but policies around immigration that were quite hard line. So you saw a lot of those policies being rolled out. A lot of the things that we're talking about around education too, they sort of bubbled up in the years leading up to his run for president. I mean, that has continued since then, of course, but it seemed like those have sort of been structured to sort of position him as somebody who's going to be running for higher office. One thing I'll say, though, too, I mean, thinking about Robert and his book and some of the sort of pushback that actually occurred in the 1950s to some of these rules, you are seeing some of that too. So, for example, the Stop Woke Act, and of course, it's also known as the Individual Freedom Act. Stop Woke stands for Wrong to Our Kids and Employees. It's intended to restrict the discussion of or teaching ideas related to race and sex. That has actually had some pushback in federal court. So a federal judge, for example, permanently blocked part of the act, saying it violates free speech rights under the First and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So there has been some pushback to some of these things, and I think that also kind of mirrors what we were seeing in the 1950s, and as Robert sort of describes in his book.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably the south of Florida has a lot more power today than it did back in the 1950s. If you win Miami-Dade County, it's much more important now than it was back then. I'm from Illinois, which has its own storied political machine. Many former governors have gone to jail, as you know, Robert, and a lot of Illinois power players were in the Obama administration, Rahm Emanuel, Bill Daley, et cetera. Are the people who are in the administration now, Susie Wiles, Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, Matthew, are they products of Florida's political machine?
Absolutely. I mean, Susie Wiles is a really interesting kind of major player, sort of somebody who has maybe not been so much in the forefront of folks' imaginations, but people who've been paying attention to Florida politics know that she helped, in the first kind of iteration of the Trump presidency. She was helping Governor Ron DeSantis for a time, and then they had a falling out. But she really did help Governor DeSantis in his bid for governor the first time around. So somebody who has a lot of political connections and has really kind of stuck with President Trump and helped him in his return to power for his second term. So she is somebody who has had a lot of connections with Florida politics and is now, of course, kind of you're seeing that play out on the federal level too. And then Pam Bondi, of course, a fairly high-profile politician from Florida who is now sort of, iterating what was happening in Florida on the national stage. Marco Rubio, interesting case there because you will remember back in the 2016 campaign and 2015 leading up to that, very outspoken, as were a lot of the Republican candidates, saying that Donald Trump was not somebody they should be putting the backing. But he's come around completely and now is really stridently enforcing the Trump agenda on the international stage.
What about Ron DeSantis? Has he come around? It seems like they're getting along, Trump and DeSantis.
That's a good question. It's hard to know. Of course, the campaign for governor campaign for president, I should say, that Ron DeSantis waged was pretty bruising. So you saw a falling out between DeSantis and Trump. They seem to have mended fences a little bit. And again, it comes back to immigration, right? You saw DeSantis enthusiastically saying, we are going to support to the utmost the Trump agenda when it comes to immigration. Alligator Alcatraz, the so-called Alligator Alcatraz, as Robert just mentioned, I mean, that is that controversial detention facility that was built hastily on the airstrip and on the edge of the Everglades. So the notion of kind of creating these detention facilities and sort of using them to move migrants to before presumably deporting them. And then, of course, the making sure that sheriff's offices and police departments are fully behind supporting the Immigration and Customs Enforcement effort to arrest more folks who are here without paperwork and ship them out of the country. So around the issue of immigration, for sure, you're seeing a lot more cohesion between Governor DeSantis and President Trump.
Do you see DeSantis running again for president in 2028?
That's a good question. I don't know if 2028 would be the year, but I do think that DeSantis is somebody who has not given up on his higher political aspirations. I mean, the interesting thing, too, is that there's been a lot of talk about whether his wife, Casey DeSantis, could be a contender for governor of Florida as well. So that's a hard question to answer right now, Jeremy, but I think I wouldn't discount Governor DeSantis setting his sights on the presidency at some point.
Robert, let me go back just for a moment to your reporting and the Johns Committee, because this wasn't just about politics, as you've said. This actually ruined some people's lives. You were able to talk to victims of the Johns Committee. Just tell us about somebody who was a victim and how it affected their life.
Sure. So I spoke at length to, there are only several last living survivors of the Johns Committee purges from the 60s, and I spoke to a man named Art Copleston, who's a 93-year-old gay man who lives in Palm Springs, California, who during his sophomore year at the University of Florida in 1958 was targeted by the Johns Committee. They decided to abduct him at a very vulnerable moment. Police officers in state of Florida highway uniforms pulled him out of a final exam to embarrass him in front of his classmates and instigate panic. They took him to a random hotel on the edge of Gainesville, and they proceeded to interrogate him in the presence of a state lawyer, state interrogators and investigators, and a state senator, which made it an official public proceeding because the Johns Committee, using arcane rules, had declared they only needed a quorum of one senator, one representative, made it a state hearing. So basically he was grilled in that moment about his up to then hidden sexual life, which was Art Copleston was a gay man who was just beginning to understand himself and beginning to have his first boyfriends. And they tried to get him to confess about who he was, to confess his homosexuality, and to say every person he knew who also participated in the gay underworld of 1958 Gainesville. And the problem at that point was he knew several professors who were gay, one of whom was mentored, one of whom was an engineering professor who was his boyfriend and who was married. And he was basically denied food and water, denied access to a lawyer. This is all pre-Miranda rights, denied access to a bathroom, humiliated as a young person. And he remarkably, Art Copleston, withstood this interrogation, although he was under oath, falsely denied that he was homosexual. And then also, though there was a lot of pressure to name any name to get him out of that chair, he did not name any names. It caused his mind to shatter. At one point, Johns Committee interrogators presented a telephone number for his parents, who were recovering alcoholics who did not know he was gay. He was their only son. And they said, well, what do you think would happen if we called this another number and told your mother what a disgusting son she had? And Art Copleston, at that point, it caused such a fracturing because he knew that if they found out that their only son was gay, that would push them right back in the bottle and he would blame himself. So although Art Copleston basically survived that interrogation, was stalked for the next 3 years by state agents, some of whom would stand outside his dorm room door and listen into his last 10 feet of private space while he was just sitting there doing his homework. And then at the first chance he got, basically the day after graduation commencement, he packed up his car and fled the state of Florida and never came back. But he carried the trauma of that with him mentally. He also carried it bodily. It affected his future relationships and his capacity to receive and accept love as a gay person, because there was a lot of internalized homophobia. But Art Copleston has found the strength later in life to tell his story. He wants the story of what he suffered and the story of basically the burden that he's carried because of what the state of Florida did to him to violate his civil rights. I asked him why he was talking to me so much. He told me he wants all of this to be a knife in the legacy of Charlie Johns. He wants people to know the consequences of what happens when someone gets all the power of the state through some strange amount of loopholes and through an era and a paradigm that allows such things to occur, and what happens to individuals for the rest of their lives. Art Copleston is only one of hundreds, if not thousands, of people that were affected by the Florida Johns Committee this way.
Wow. It's fascinating history, and people should check out your book to read more about it. I do want to just finally say, I don't want to hate on Florida at all in this segment. I loved living in Florida. It's a incredibly diverse, dynamic place. It's changing all the time. It's beautiful. It's affordable for a lot of people. There are a lot of amazing things about Florida. And obviously, it's a very popular place for people to move to.
Yeah, it's a success story. There were other southern cabals and states that did not succeed the way that Florida did. That's why the legacy of the Johns Committee has bloomed only because the state of Florida has been so successful side by side. Pre-World War II, it was a rural agricultural backwater. There was no hop in Miami with its awesome vibe. There was no Suncoast Tampa St. Pete thing. Orlando was not a significant notion. And basically, it wasn't the cultural hub that now between 900 and 1,000 people want to move to every day.
Yeah, it's amazing. So let me just finally ask each of you, what should those of us who don't live in Florida know about what is coming out of Florida and is going to affect all of us? And I guess I'll start with you, Robert, just because you've been thinking about this for a long time.
Know the legacy of Tallahassee politics and understand that if you do not understand the rules of Tallahassee politics, you will be victim to them because you will be subject to them no matter what. The two major power centers of this country right now politically are Washington, D.C., where it's a bunch of Floridians running the show, and Tallahassee, Florida, which is basically dotted line parroting and experimenting with a lot of ideas. So you need to learn and understand what the origins of these Tallahassee political strategies are and where they come from. They come from this guy named Charlie Johns. They came from this specific Red Scare era, and also there were people that stood up to Charlie Johns in state and federal courts and brought him down. So it's possible to resist if you exist in a system where you understand basically what the guidelines of Tallahassee politics are going to be, know who your opposition is, know who your rights are, and look to history for the exemplars who defeated the prior Red Scares.
Matthew, what about you? What should we know as non-Floridians about what's happening in our country right now and its roots in Florida?
It's a great question. It's hard to really put my finger on one thing. Just to take a slightly different tack, I would say have a think about kind of nuts and bolts things like homeowners insurance. And this is a little bit of a warning in some ways. My colleague Jessica Mazzaris has done some fantastic reporting on the kind of confluence of the hurricane season and the homeowners insurance crisis. And some of the experts she spoke to are saying that, look, what's happening in Florida with the spiraling costs of homeowners insurance and the fact that you have big companies essentially kind of washing their hands of the state and saying it's too expensive for us to be in business here, that is something that you might start to see, if not you are already seeing in other states. So, Florida, of course, people love it for its warm weather and the sunshine, but there are some things about the kind of insurance market structure here that are not great, and it can be kind of a perilous place to live, and that's something to kind of keep your eye on as you think about other parts of the country that are also facing natural disasters.
Yeah, when we sold our house in Florida, like a month before we closed, they canceled our insurance for exactly that reason. I think it's very difficult right now to get it in especially coastal parts of Florida.
Yeah, it is, and it's a political problem too that hasn't been solved. I mean, the state legislature has taken several goes at it over the last few years and hasn't seemed to quite sort of get it right, and it still remains a challenge for homeowners, especially those folks living on the coast.
That is Matthew Peddie, who is the host of WUSF's weekly public affairs show, Florida Matters. And we've also been speaking with Robert Fieseler, the author of the new book, American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives. Thanks to both of you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening to One Thing Trump Did. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next middle episode will be in your podcast feed later this week. We'll be asking if crime is an issue where you live, and if it is, what do you want to be done about it? And if you like this podcast, please rate it wherever you get your podcasts and write a review. Our theme music was composed by Noah Haidu. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather. In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to everybody.
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'm going back to my hometown to uncover the truth. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.